So once we went through mapping all of those various stages out, we were able to then see we've got some really fundamental issues in this process where we're not hitting our internal timelines, which then means we're not processing it.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I get the absolute privilege of sitting down with BPM practitioners. You would have just heard the little introduction that we play in front of all of our episodes. And for most of you, you've probably seen some of the episodes before where we're into our 80s in terms of how many episodes we've been able to produce and release. And, you know, we have learnt so much. So I hope, like I encourage you to do it in most of our episodes, I hope you've got your notepad and pen there, unless, of course, you're out having a jog or walking the dogs. Maybe you can't do that. But we glean so much from these conversations, or I certainly glean a lot from these conversations. And today I had the absolute privilege of sitting down with Lee Rowland. Now, Lee is the Supply Chain Digital Transformation Lead at Bega Dairy and Drinks. And this is a more recent role after coming across from Lion, where Lee had been for the last 18 years. But yeah, certainly excited for this conversation. Lee, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Daniel. Really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
That's good. And obviously that was a very brief introduction to who you are and what you do. Obviously, for the people that are listening, they know this is a podcast where we dive into process management and how it's what it looks like in organizations. But I guess a good question to begin with, and I guess what our audience likes to understand or get context is when were you first introduced to the topic of BPM, and then take us on a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think BPM sort of became BPM for me, I guess, a lot longer than I even knew what it was. So pretty much right throughout my 20 plus year supply chain, working in supply chain and through various roles, be it planning, materials, procurement, supply chain director roles, process has been key to everything we've done. It's probably only in the last 5 or so years that the BPM and business process management, and I guess that term sort of became more sort of available to me in terms of what it meant. But I think through all of those roles of supply chain, it's been about what is our process. How do we execute what we're doing? How do we make improvements on that? So I think in a supply chain where you're looking to continue to be really efficient in how you operate, manage your costs, continually improve, and obviously make sure that the customer's happy at the end of that every time, process is key to all of that. So right throughout, probably the first 15 years of my role, I was doing it in any role that I was in. An example of that would be we went through a process of building new production lines. So we had to understand every little process that was required within that from an input and output point of view, as well as the performance on the line. So that was really crucially important to being able to have an efficient process and for the business to be confident to invest money in a new production line. More recently, sort of been involved in the digital tech and particularly around process automation, understanding what your process is. Invariably, once you understand it, there will be challenges and variations that you need to improve. So then we'd step through, I guess, an optimization of that. And that's where we've been able to automate processes, particularly using robotic process automation or RPA, or bringing detail or data in through optical character recognition. So that's sort of been our focus in the last couple of years. How can we really understand, drive improvement in process through automation?
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great. And an interesting point there you made at the start was, you know, you've been managing processes for the good part of 15, 20 years, but it only, I guess, the topic or I guess the business process management as a methodology or as an approach to managing was only maybe in the last 5 years. And I would say that that's that's come up quite a number of times in these conversations I'm having, where the guests I'm talking to that are part of these organizations, they were already managing processes long before it was actually given to them as a specific task or role that they needed to do. And I think we can see it in all areas of our life. Like last night when I made dinner, I followed a process, whether I realized it or not at the time. So I think, as Dan O'Neill puts it, he's the former chief process officer at CBA, he talks about how everything that an organization does to deliver value, it is through a process, whether you know it or not. And so I think, getting to that point where you understand, we can actually improve the way we manage our processes. I think that's something that is exciting for an organization, because there's a lot of value that can be delivered there. But talk to us about, I guess, some of the challenges an organization will face when adopting and implementing BPM at whatever stage, because we've got a range of people listening to this that are all different at all different stages of process maturity.
Like many things, I think it's very relevant to BPM. It's about where do you start, and particularly if you're new to it, or even if you're more advanced and you're looking to, I guess, understand the next part of your journey in BPM. It's where do you start, and what do I need to do? Where are the right areas to focus to add value to the business? To your point earlier, everything is about process, and we want to make sure it's as efficient as possible. So I think what we found, particularly early days, it was just getting the right people in a room, having a conversation, be it a whiteboard, be it a spreadsheet, nothing too flash or fancy, but understanding the key elements of our process. Now that we know more about process and we're looking to automate it, we go from broad, big steps within a process down to individual keystroke levels so that we can automate it, particularly when we're dealing with systems. But that was sort of always a challenge right throughout our journey, and we've still got a long way to go. But from starting to where we are now, automating processes, it's about where do you start? And I guess my advice for anybody listening, particularly early in the journey, is just make a start, get the right people in place, have a focus area, and you might find that focus area isn't particularly the right one over time, but generally as you start to have a conversation about, we might have started somewhere in the logistics space, and how can we manage costs better, and how can we improve customer relations and customer interactions. Invariably, we found from that conversation 4 or 5 other different processes or areas of focus that we could particularly drive into over time. And that sort of, out of a simple starting conversation, started to build up a bit of a roadmap of things or areas that we wanted to focus on from a process point of view. And again, invariably that will change over time, but you've just got to make that start, have that conversation. As I said, whiteboard, Excel spreadsheet, right people with the right knowledge, particularly SMEs in the area that's relevant to your business, and go from there.
Right. And when talking about automation, there's this, I don't know if you'd call it a debate or out there, but or I guess a train of thought where people would say you need to improve or optimize a process before automation. I guess as you just mentioned, then it's going to be a continual journey of improving. It's not like you can optimize a process to a point where it'll be perfect forever moving forward. So what is that balance between making sure you have an efficient process before you pull the trigger on automation? Or would you argue that if you start with automation, you're going to find the areas for improvement anyways?
I think the way you started it, Daniel, is exactly how we've found it. Any process that we've looked at, we've always ended up optimizing it before we've automated it. And sometimes even before optimizing it, it's just understanding, as I sort of said before, the key steps of the process, because it's quite interesting as you delve into processes in more detail. It's okay to have a high level view of step by step on a whiteboard, but when you automate, you are really getting down to a keystroke level. It's surprising the amount of processes that are not well understood within our business, and you find that you need to be bringing in so many different people who own different elements of a process just to be able to bring a full picture together. And quite often, nobody in the business, in the examples that we had, at least early days, nobody knew the full end-to-end process or how it would work. So that understanding is absolutely key to get that end-to-end process, because just by being able to see that, you can then understand where things might be conflicting or varying. And then that allows you to then step into, okay, the output of this particular process is to have an efficient, timely process that allows us to process customer orders within 20 minutes of receiving them or something like that. But we might have variations that say that could take days. So it's then understanding how do we fix those particular issues in that process that I've found we've been able to, every time we've looked at it, optimize and improve a process. Sometimes we'll go back and then what we would call enhance that process on multiple iterations. Again, to my earlier point, it's about starting, understanding the process, building something that adds value, and then continually improving on that.
Yes, great. And do you have some examples that you can share, I guess, through this journey, whether it's right at the beginning where, I guess, you realize, well, we actually don't understand the full end-to-end process. We need to understand it. We need clarity around this. We need transparency on what's actually going on so that we can optimize it before automating. Do you have examples where there was a particular process that was given focus and attention, and even before getting to the automation stage, you could already see it? This is delivering value to the organization just by having this transparency and just by being able to see what's actually going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. So where our biggest wins have been, and was our first, I guess, foray into automation, or our proof of concept in automation to prove value for our selected RPA and OCR tools, was in our logistics claims process, which I won't get into too much of the business detail, but effectively, if there's an issue with a delivery to a customer will raise a query or a claim request or some means of suggesting we believe there's an issue with this delivery. And we're a very large company doing tens of thousands of orders a year. And whilst we maintain a really high service level, by sheer volume, we do have lots of issues that need to be managed, whether they be real delivery issues or perceived delivery issues. We found through mapping out a process similar to what I said before, it passed through a whole raft of hands. So a claim could be shared to us by the customer to a central claims team, then handed on to a local claims team, then handed on to the logistics team to review. They would then go to the warehouse to come back through that flow. So it could flow through 10 different sets of hands just to try and address a claim. And by the time we'd gone through that process, and once we'd understood it, we were meant to be responding to these, depending on the claim and the value, within 7, 14 or 28 days. Quite often that time period was just flowing past and we didn't even know that was happening. So effectively we were losing sales out of this process because we didn't understand the process. We didn't have a good handle on it. So once we went through mapping all of those various stages out, we were able to then see, okay, we've got some really fundamental issues in this process where we're not hitting our internal timelines, which then means we're not processing it, we're not getting full value for our sales, and the work that we're actually spending doing it is actually being wasted because we're not getting to it in time. So that was a real trigger point for us to say there's an opportunity for automation here. So I guess we went from a turnaround time in this particular process of claims and a huge backlog of tens of thousands of unique line items to be processed, to getting to a point where we review these every day. We'll review the various systems and do we have a key pieces of information such as our proof of delivery? Do we have a logged delivery issue that we need to refer to? And quite often, I'd say, I think we're about 75% of our issues now we can resolve within 24 hours and get the right information back to the customer, be that we accept your claim against us because there was a short delivery or a damage, or we believe there may not have been an issue here and here's the evidence of why. So we've certainly been able to turn around a process that was I think at the time we said we probably need 10 people to do this. We had 1.5 people working on it. So we were never going to win that process, particularly when it was so disjointed and we're so far behind. We've been able to use automation and the understanding of process to turn this process around, which was in days, weeks, months, within sort of 24 to 48 hours generally.
That's incredible. And when you were embarking on that process improvement initiative, did you know that, did you have an idea of what was possible? Did you know that, 75% of these issues or problems could be resolved in 24 hours? Is that what you were aiming for? Or is this, did it kind of unfold as you got more clarity and transparency around the process?
We knew there was a big issue. We knew there was a big opportunity. We just didn't know how big, and not knowing automation as we do now, we didn't sort of set any targets to say we're processing at 5 or 10% now and got to 75%. We weren't clear on that, but what we did know was, based on the disjointed process, which I mentioned before, that passes through so many hands, that was absolutely opportunity for the business to become more efficient and save money. And that became transparent. So basically, once we understood the process better, which again, it started with just getting on the whiteboard, mapping things out, and then understanding, it actually goes through 10 different people's hands to be able to get to a resolution of an issue, which is far outside our acceptable time limits within the business. So that process understanding put us on a path of automation is the right tool. There's benefit here, not just from a commercial point of view in terms of how we're able to process the claims, but it's that turnaround time that I mentioned earlier as well, and getting it down to that 24, 48 hours, assuming all the right inputs are available to the process.
Yeah, that's amazing. And where would you say bad processes come from? Because there would be a lot of bad processes out there in many large organizations, just due to the fact that, whether it's time, whether it's, a series of Band-Aid fixes to a process, whether it's, the same person that's worked in that area and therefore, I guess, change hasn't been encouraged. But where do you think these bad processes develop?
We're going to be a bit of a broken record here, Daniel, but I think it's about the understanding of the process. So if people in the business aren't clear on what your processes are, it's not well documented. To your point, when people change or you have a temp come in, you'll share the process with them. You might get 60, 70%, and then they'll fill in the gaps that they don't know. So all of a sudden you've got 3 or 4 variations in this process from this user to the next. So it comes from not having a good understanding of your process. So you can have bad processes, but understand them and manage them well because you know how they operate. And you might have some plans in place to improve them, automate them, remove them. Quite often we've found, not quite often, but regularly enough, we've found processes we've been able to remove from the business because they didn't add value. Right. It's about that understanding. I think that's the key to being able to avoid bad process, or as I just said, at least understand it so that you can have the right steps in place to action it over a period of time, and it doesn't have from a supply chain view, a cost impact, quality impact, safety impact, or something that impacts the customer. All those things are the things we're trying to avoid. Yeah,
that's good. And you were talking about with this particular process, where there were 10 different, stakeholders or people involved in this process, bringing them all together, trying to understand what's actually going on. When you do make improvements to this process, whether you're automating it or whether you're just improving it for the process performers, the ones that are actually carrying out the work, how do you bring them along for the journey so that there isn't any resistance from them? I could imagine that if you're going in there and saying, hey, Bob, we're not going to do it that way anymore. This is the way we're going to do it. Or, hey, Lisa, we're actually going to take your process and we're going to give it to a robot to do now. How do you bring these people on the journey so that instead of being resistant, they actually bring a lot of value to this process, that they bring their own thoughts and ideas, and in fact, they take ownership of it. They're excited about this change because it's going to be better for the organization and it's going to be better for them as well.
As you work through that, there's a couple of key stages that you get, different responses for different people in the business. And typically, if you're talking about a process that people understand that is clunky, generally they don't like it, it's not adding value, you'll find people will want to have a conversation about it. So having those initial conversations and starting to drill into how does the process work, what are some of the issues, we haven't found to be a big issue. Generally, people will want to talk about their problems. So that part of it generally goes okay. It's when you get to the next stage of, okay, how do we make change and let's implement change, where we start to have some challenges around what is the right change. I don't have time for this change. Is it really that big an issue? Despite when we started talking about it a little while ago, it was a big issue for me. So I think it's about, again, building the understanding of what the process is and how we can improve it. So I think there's a role of, business process management experts, or in our case, my team of automation experts or automation developers, to be able to really bring to the business what it is that the challenges are in the process and how we've solved similar problems before is always a good one. So if we can give case studies, similar examples of where we weren't able to see the information that we require out of this process. Now we've made this information live in a dashboard through Power BI or whatever your chosen data reporting tool is. People can quickly see that's going to help me. How can I help you help me? It's getting to that point in their mind where, how can I help you to help me? Because I can see that you're trying to help me. And with people, and depending on the situation, the business, it's all different. But once you get to that tipping point, you can then start to move forward. And you may not get, in our example, I reckon probably 7 to 8 out of 10 of those groups, we got to that tipping point pretty early on and were able to move forward pretty quickly. There were certainly some stragglers across the business who, for their own reasons, were sort of struggling to come along with the journey, where we're able to, continue to work with them and make some small changes to the process without going whole scale, and we can get some sort of quick early wins. And then they started to twig that, yeah, this can add value to me. Potentially what I'm doing now, I won't need to do anymore. I don't, as a SME, they might be doing it and not liking it. So continually processing the same type of document every day with the same sort of issues. People can then see, I can use automation or I can use OCR tools to fill that gap, and then I can start to manage the process as opposed to being neck deep on other days in the process. That was sort of how we were able to bring people along. And as I said, sort of 7 to 8 out of 10 of those people the groups within that process I mentioned earlier around our claims process got it early on. Others took time, and we needed some quick early wins to be able to bring them on, which happened in time.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And when you do get these quick early wins, have you found that it spreads quickly? News spreads quickly. Have you found that when you do, get those quick early wins and communicate that to the wider business, is that fostering a culture of finding their areas of improvement, not just from your team that naturally, think like that, but from the wider business that's like, hey, if they can automate that process, then what can they do for me in my area? Are you finding that that's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So our focus, as I mentioned, our proof of concept was in logistics, and then we sort of stepped out to how can we help more broadly across supply chain. So where can we add value in manufacturing or planning and so forth? That was our initial focus, but we've quickly found as we've been able to add value and help people understand their processes and optimize their processes, and maybe we will or we won't automate, but helping them understand their processes is a big enough win. We've found we're now working in customer service, finance, sales, various different areas, basically nearly a full coverage of the business now, to be able to help with that process understanding and where appropriate, bring excellence. And our next step is really sort of trying to get an identity in the business around what we will term business process excellence. Exactly the same thing as business process management, but a different term to try and endear people to coming along and being able to work through that process journey with us. So that's sort of our next step, leveraging some of the tools that were brought on recently, particularly in process mining and task mining.
That's amazing. That's great. And I guess likewise in trying to get buy-in from these stakeholders that are part of the process, I'd imagine that you've been on a journey, or for those that are listening, that they will need to embark on this journey as well, where you need to get buy-in from the senior leadership, from the executive team, maybe not to begin with. I've heard many stories where they've started small, on a small project. They've got those quick early wins that you were talking about before it was actually adopted by senior leadership. But talk to us about that journey of pitching to senior leadership, getting their buy-in, because obviously that unlocks more budget, more resources, and more focus and attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything you've described, Daniel, is sort of what we've been through. I think some of the key things for us to be able to move forward is understanding the business well enough to know what are the problems in the business, what are the things that are keeping our executives awake at night, and how can we add value to those or improve those. So in a manufacturing business, as I sort of mentioned earlier, it's about quality, it's about safety, it's about continuous improvement and costs. So how can we impact those areas? So early days when I was going to senior management with this is what we're looking to do and automate, we went through a lot of discussions, a lot of sharing, a lot about what's happened in industry, and there was a lot of understanding, yep, that looks good, maybe just not quite cracking through, okay, let's get on with it. So that's where it came to those small wins. We were able to identify some processes in our business, and the one I've spoken about before with claims at the moment, and show that we're only hitting our KPIs 5 or 10% of the time. Imagine if we can make this 50, again, not knowing where we would get to, what change that can make. And we were able to quickly say, this has a customer benefit, this has a cost benefit, this has an efficiency benefit. And if we want to do this another way, we'll go and hire 10 people. Or in this particular case, that was never really an option. So it was, let's automate this process and bring value to it. And there was one really simple, I guess, turning moment when I was having multiple discussions with senior leaders in the business. We're able to show, I guess, variations in the process. It was a simple video or schema of what our process was using a process mining tool that said, we have 35 different variations of this process. It can take from 4 hours to 6 weeks to complete this process, or in some cases months. And in each case, you're not hitting your KPI. This is the impact to the business. That 5-minute discussion of a simple visual really brought it home. I think there was lots of pre-work and lots of discussions. And as I mentioned earlier, showing case studies is all great, gives understanding. But that sort of turning point was really, this is how it's relevant to our business. This is the problem we have now in our process, and this is how we think we can fix it.
Yeah, that's great. And when you've adopted BPM, you're implementing BPM, you've got buy-in or sponsorship from the necessary stakeholders. What are some objections that may arise as you were talking about this process before, where you got buy-in pretty early on from 7 to 8 of the different stakeholders, but then there were a few people across the business that were, dragging their feet a little. What are some of these objections that you might face? Because I think that's going to be beneficial for those listening, because they might come across a similar thing. And how did you overcome that?
Yeah, our two biggest challenges was then, and somewhat still now, is time. So people are always busy. I've got time to do something else when they don't understand the fact that going through this process of process understanding, optimization, removing process or automating process, the outcome will be better. I don't have time to even think about that, let alone get on with it. So I think that was sort of one of our key challenges we need to work through. And I think the other one was around capability. Do we have the right capability in the business to be able to manage, in our case where it's automation, the technology that we need to have to make these changes? So the way we were able to work through that was really, particularly around the time, was give the sell of, yes, there's some upfront commitment of time and understanding, but even if we don't go to a full-scale automation process, you're going to have so much better understanding of what your process is and areas you should focus on, and align those to some of the challenges within that particular function. As a business level, I mentioned from a manufacturing business, it's pretty simple. It's cost, it's service, it's safety, it's quality. Within a particular function, it might be around, if it was planning, it's around accuracy and forecasts and so forth. How can we have an impact on what time you spend trying to improve your forecast accuracy, for example?
Right.
So I think it's, again, what is the value that we can add to your day-to-day role? And then the capability part. So early days when we're bringing automation on, we were just learning about it. I guess what we've been fortunate enough now to progress to a point where we've got a centre of excellence in automation who have really strong capability, and then they're rolling that out through the business. So we have a central capability building team, if you like, who not only deliver the automation, they bring the capability to the business units and the SME users, and they also provide a support function. So if you're just not quite clear on, we've rolled out a new automation process, you've done your training, but you're not quite clear on it, we've got internal support who can be there every time you have an issue to step through that, and giving people the assurity that they don't have to go external to a consultant or something like that, or they're not on their own. Most simplistically, when they're dealing with new technology and capability, you can generally get people to understand the support is here to help you do this, wherever you are at the stage of business process or automation.
Yeah. And as well as, I guess, driving that, driving value for the business by, improving, optimizing, automating your business processes. I guess that transparency also allows organizations to pivot or adapt in turbulent times. And I think over the last 2 years, we've seen, especially a year and a half ago when, this pandemic came about, and, it forced a lot of organizations to question what they are doing. And I've had many conversations with different people. And one of them that stood out to me was, it was a large telecommunications organization. I think they were doing, had 180 programs of work or something, projects maybe going on at the one time. But when they scrutinized them and I guess criticized, like, well, what value are these pieces of work delivering to the organization, they ended up scrapping most of them, I think 150, 160 of them, because they really weren't delivering that value. So I guess my question is, when going through turbulent times, or looking at the last 2 years going through COVID, how does BPM or process management play a part in the turbulent nature that we have been through and are still going through? I mean, what's it been like for Bega or for Lion, and how did you guys sort of navigate that? And was process management a big part of helping you get through?
Yeah, absolutely. I think your example around the telecommunications company is sort of similar for us. We had plans by function or strategies by function, which are underpinned by a large amount of initiatives. And in a perfect year, we're probably not going to get all those done. So it's a similar story. I think you mentioned 160 odd. We're probably maybe not quite that many, but a high amount of initiatives we're trying to do to continue to improve the business. And through turbulent times, it's about reviewing that, moving back to, okay, what is most important to one maintain our current operations and maintain our current quality levels, service levels, all those key aspects I mentioned a couple of times now. And then how do we move forward on focusing on the most important things? Because invariably in turbulent times, there's lots of new things, there's lots of changes, lots of things that come up that take your time away from those ideal improvement initiatives that you would like to have. So business process management's played a role in being able to improve those key processes to make sure that, one, they're continuing to deliver what they need to within the business and where we can improve them, but also give, I guess, better, standardization or better rigidity of process where appropriate, so that when we do have turbulent times, issues come in, changes to supply, demand, what we can manufacture, where we can deliver, when we can deliver, we have a really strong process that allows us to be able to flex where we need to, but 80% of the process we know will just happen despite all the outside concerns or noise that's happening. So when you have a strong process that, I guess, use the word rigid, it might not be the right word, but it's a really strong process that allows you to flex where you need to, but it's resilient to other issues that's happening across the supply chain or the full process in any particular function. You're able to, get good results despite the challenging times that we've all been through.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. And now, I guess, looking forward to the future of business process management. I mean, we've certainly touched on technology and how technology can really help organisations in managing their business processes. We've touched on process mining and automation, RPA. What do you think the next 2, 3, 5 years of BPM looks like for organisations, and where do you feel they should be giving their focus, their attention, their time, effort and energy to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that certainly the last part of your question in terms of where should they focus is a little bit dependent on where they are in the journey. But I'd say for us, who's been through the process of establishing technology, establishing capability and looking to roll that out at more scale across the business, it's certainly around continuing to leverage the existing technology we have in RPA and OCR tools and standardise those. There's always improvements in those tools. So looking to continue to iterate and integrate new improvements in those tools in. It's also about some of the more recent additions to our sort of toolkit, if you like, of process and task mining, which I mentioned a couple of times, but we're still sort of learning our way through that. So it's how can we use those to, I guess, an end state here might be, and this is certainly possible, but we've got as a business some way to go where you can almost automatically understand a process, document a process, identify variances, create the ideal process, build an automation to do that almost automatically on its own, utilising integrated tools such as process, task mining, RPA, and some other support tools around that. So that's sort of a vision where we'd like to get to in terms of being able to automate the automation process, if you like, which is all about bringing about better processes and better process management, or as I've sort of mentioned earlier, we're going to badge it within our business as business process excellence. So that's really our journey in the coming years of being able to most simply automate the automation of processes where we can to add value. And I don't say that without ensuring right throughout that process, it needs to be automating and adding value to the business. It's not just automation for automation's sake, or it's not just reviewing a process for process sake. Because as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the process is there for probably no good reason. So we'll either optimize it into another process or remove it. I think it's really about how we can use that technology to drive our journey in the future of process understanding, optimization and automation where appropriate, or sometimes it's just about visibility of the process.
Yes, yeah, that's fantastic. And for those that are listening to our conversation, as I mentioned, I think maybe before we even got started talking today, or the official interview, I was saying that, we've got a wide range of people listening to these episodes, listening to these conversations. They come from different backgrounds and different levels of BPM experience or maturity. For those that are listening that maybe you have whet their appetite to learn more about this topic. They want to understand, well, what does BPM look like, and what can it look like for us? What can it look like for our organization and where we're currently at? Where should these people go to, to continue this learning? But I think, obviously, as you mentioned at the start, right at the beginning, the best thing to do is just to start and to start working on it. But where do you go to learn more? I guess that can complement this starting by looking at your own processes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I reiterate that message that it is just about making a start. But in terms of, depending on where companies are at or where individuals are at, I guess, as I've mentioned throughout, from a supply chain background, so there's lots of process-specific elements that's available from a supply chain point of view. So anybody who's interested in that particular space, something like ASCII, the Australian Supply Chain Institute, would be a good place to start. From a automation point of view, there's lots of tools and lots of different consultants available to do this at varied levels, from huge scale to just making a start. I'd encourage people to just make a start, get something simple in, and then build from that. So we use tools like Blue Prism and UiPath, who have a really strong education, community and development. But there is other tools there, absolutely. So I'm not particularly suggesting people have to adopt certain tools. And there is a number of, as I mentioned earlier, consultants in that space. We use the Real Group, who's been able to help us grow our capability and expand what we do in the automation and business process space. I think for true BPM, again, it's about starting. You can start with research, watching more of Daniel's episodes would be a good start. There's online courses that you can do in a few days, which are around introductory BPM, right through to, I think there's a number of universities offering masters in business process management. So depending on where you're at and what your interest level is, there's certainly lots of tools and lots of resources available, and education facilities supporting business process management, particularly given the growth over recent years in that space and the understanding of the importance, which I sort of leave with. I've been doing it for 20 years, but I didn't really know what it was till maybe 5 years ago, which is sounds like, based on the experience with your other interviews, Daniel, pretty common.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Well, Lee, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I've been taking a ton of notes here. I've been certainly learning a lot myself and gleaning a lot from your experiences and stories. So I just want to thank you for sitting down with me. I'm sure that our audience is going to learn a lot from our conversation.
No problems at all. I hope it adds some value from some people who end up seeing this.